So here we are again, podcast number 39 of On Air. But this one's a meeting of the minds where we let the conversation flow. And we've titled this one A New Order of the Ages, and you'll understand shortly why we've called it that. For me, the overwhelming theme of the past few years, and what appears abundantly clear at the moment, is this breaking down of illusions, or more to the point, the revealing of truths, which both you and I are.
Or revelation.
Or revelations, that's right.
Yeah.
So everything seems like it's being exposed, from the Epstein files, corrupt politicians, the grossly ineffective governments around the world. We see that constantly. The medical industry, or big pharma as a lot of people have called it. Police corruption, unjust laws, religious institutions, financial fraud, the money system. I could go on forever. Okay. Now, all the institutions and people that we've placed our trust in, essentially, these are breaking down literally before our eyes. And it's especially in the West.
Yep.
And it's happening on a much larger scale and pace than we've ever experienced before. So in today's show, for our listeners, we're going to discuss that it's no accident that it's happening all at this particular moment in time. And for many of us, this great unveiling began with what we all now know to be the COVID debacle or the pandemic. And yet others have been warning about it for years, as you have, and I'll get to you in a moment.
Yeah.
So today we're going to examine what appears to be the collapse of society as we know it. And we'll discuss things like, people refer to it as the Great Reset. You know, you've heard that term used time and time again, and what that actually means. The significance of the Age of Aquarius, and much, much more. So welcome back, Phoenician Hunter.
Hello. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. I think this chat is long overdue and an extremely important topic, because I think what is transpiring at the moment, and I know this for a fact, will affect everyone eventually.
Mm.
You know, you can hide and turn a blind eye to it, but it will catch up with you. And, you know, as you rightly said, we haven't gone through something this major in living memory.
Sure.
Okay. I know people are going to say, oh yeah, but there's been, you know, depressions and wars and all that. But not a whole complete collapse of the system. And this is what we're going to discuss. Now, I would just mention first off that we did have a general discussion about some of these topics like COVID, the Great Reset, and even the Age of Aquarius in an earlier podcast.
Yeah.
But I've been wanting to revisit these topics in much greater detail. And with what is currently occurring around the world, you know, I felt that, you know, there is no better time than now to readdress.
I agree. And yes, we did talk about it earlier. And for those listening, it's episode 25. And it is another meeting of the minds. Well, it's part one of
The
Meeting
first,
of the Minds.
yeah.
For those interested, going back for a listen, and you'll find that episode in our playlist on most platforms. So I'll get us started and perhaps set the scene with a couple of examples, if that's okay. So over the past 5 years, discussions generally globally have been dominated still, even to this day, around COVID. You know, it's since shifted to the vaccines and how much people were really told at the time. And both you and I know that the narrative was carefully designed. You know, government propaganda and aggression in full force at the time clearly spread fear and compliance, right? Now, add to that how dissent was treated. Now, most critics, or again, conspiracy theorists, and, you know, as we were labelled publicly, and I hold so much disdain for that term conspiracy theory.
But now, we're right. We're always right.
we were right. And I know that a lot of people will agree with this, those that came on the journey with us. Now, we were all dismissed in the same way. We were crackpots. We were spreading misinformation, disinformation. After the debacle in the US, you know, it's extremely dangerous to our democracy. If people remember, every media outlet and every commercial station was using that term. Fear-mongering. That was narrative control at its finest.
Yeah. And I believe the COVID theatre was the initiation event to this great unveiling or you know, awakening, which we'll get to in a little bit. But what interests me most about COVID was human behavior. I mean, that's
Yes.
just something that has always interested me. And
Yes.
that's why I even wrote my book. Okay. Well, my book is about why do people think the things they do? Why? Why do
Yeah.
they believe and think a certain way? Okay. So that's what interested me, and how people acted and treated their family and friends.
Mm.
Especially when one didn't go along with the program,
Yeah.
and that is something that will remain with me forever. And I know it affected you as
Oh,
well. And
we're in
and
the
to
same boat.
me,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm sure you'll have something to say about it, but
Mm.
people are very dangerous, okay, when they are fearful. And that's the condition that, the governmente,
Mm.
control, that's the conditions they manifest. They create those conditions on purpose, all right? Now, I've heard it said that how you acted during COVID is who you really are, okay?
Wow. Interesting.
Okay? Because adversity brings out your true character, okay?
Yeah. Look, and I completely agree. You and I think, are on the same boat here. And can I just add to that, that later we saw the evidence around adverse reactions, and this is after the
Yeah.
effect. And I just posted something on social media that has started to gain a lot of traction, which was the first video of the nurse who took the first vaccine, and literally in real time she collapsed. So, and this was highlighted by institutions like VAERS in the US and Udra Vigilance in Europe. But what's troubling to me is how little effort was made to explain the real effect, specifically by the mainstream. I think they, and you would agree that they were complicit in this whole
I
theatre.
can't stand
Yeah,
journalists and
yeah,
reporters, and
agree.
the mouth of Sauron is what they are.
Oh, that's just perfect description, Phoenician Hunter. And again, further to that, into that vacuum came more serious outcomes, long-term illnesses, immune damage,
They're still coming out.
the emergence of cancers that
Yep.
were brought upon immediately after injection. Several incidences of Bell's palsy. And I know personally of two people this happened to, literally after taking the jab. So personally, my belief is that there may be more long-term biological consequences that we don't understand yet, potentially including other cancer pathways.
Okay, once again, I'm more interested in how this all affects one on a subconscious level.
Okay,
Okay, and I'll explain what I mean.
sure.
For example, all those people involved in the government, agencies, the police, the medical industry,
Mm,
the media, who we just mentioned, who knowingly spread lies and fear,
yeah.
or treat their fellow human with contempt or
Oh,
violence.
yes.
I'm looking at you, policemen and women,
I agree.
right? Following orders, to me, get another job,
Yep.
okay?
Yep.
Just get another job. I've had to change jobs many times. Get another job.
Yep. Yep.
Or even those who even remain silent,
Yep.
knowing what was really going on, is another one too.
Doctors, the
Yeah,
healthcare industry, etc.
police again, everyone,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Now, I wonder when these people reflect on their behavior, will they feel any remorse, guilt?
Mm.
Will they even ask for forgiveness? When the truth of these things have come out, like you mentioned, because I truly believe there is still a lot more to be revealed about, the COVID vaccines.
Of course.
And in fact, it's moved to vaccines in general, right? About that, those are coming out. And those people who are complicit better have their house in order from a conscience, a moral point of view, because they're going to have to answer to a higher power than
Yes.
their boss.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So
What?
when that time comes, and what I want to stress, this topic is about this energy, and we'll discuss that later, and an energy and something that you're not going to be able to turn a blind eye to. You're going to have to confront it. And like I said, you better have your house in order, because, yeah, you're going to answer to something a lot more powerful than your boss who I was taking orders.
Beautifully said. And as you know, as you and I both know, that this pattern didn't just stop with the pandemic, and we're not going to focus on COVID
No,
in this discussion because we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. But we've been seeing it in Gaza, for example, for decades, and it's clear. This incident rather has clearly escalated over the last few years. Now, I refer to this as graphic realities filtered through language. And I know that you're big on etymology and you're big on words and language, etc. But what do I mean by this? And, please step in at any point if you feel to, that civilian deaths, and you mentioned this in a few episodes earlier, and I think it may have been episode 25, where you talked about the death counter. So civilian deaths were reframed as collateral. The context was completely stripped away. The coverage narrowed until moral clarity became inconvenience. War crimes, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, that, Milakovsky is now a bona fide war criminal and has a bounty on his head by the ICC. Now, we have collective punishment via the deliberate targeting of innocent civilians. And all these aren't just sensational claims by two independent podcasters, right? They've been verified by human rights organisations worldwide. But what's undeniable is the asymmetry of power and the scale of human suffering. And yet, we're continuously told to look away. Nothing to see here, folks. We're told to accept simplified narratives, to trust official statements.
And it's always the same.
It's always the same. And the lesson from COVID, in my opinion, should have taught us this. It really should have woken people up. And when institutions like, the puppet governments we have today around the world, when they demand belief instead of scrutiny, skepticism doesn't become dangerous. It's bloody well necessary, right? And then we have things like the Epstein files, whatever you want to call them, which is now
another great unveiling is happening there.
Yep, unveiling. And I, again, as a side note, I personally feel that Epstein is an employee. He's not the centre. He's an employee.
Of course.
We'll get to that later if we touch on that. But, these Epstein files are now front and centre across all social media and all media platforms, where it's been undeniably linked back to Mossad and Zionist Israel. So, their push for war with Iran, for example, anti-Semitism laws that are cropping up in Australia and other Commonwealth countries where,
even America.
Anti-Semitism wasn't really a thing in those countries until now, right? And people being jailed simply for speaking their truth. Now, what I want to add to this is, what's happened with the recent developments on TikTok in the US, and particularly with Oracle's Larry Ellison. To me, he's a shady character, and he's made no bones about his allegiance to Israel, and mind you, he's a self-proclaimed Zionist. So
they're proud to say it now. No one's hiding anymore. This is the thing. No one's. It's all in the open.
And we'll get to that. And I'd like your view on why that's happening. And I know that you're going to go deep in terms of the consciousness. We see TikTok now has clearly revised their algorithms. And what I mean by that, and I've seen it firsthand, is that any videos that are questioning Israel, not being antagonistic towards them, or questioning Israel, questioning Zionism, questioning Netanyahu, or even showing any level of support for Palestine, are being stricken from the record. And I've personally had several strikes around community guidelines, whatever that means, for posts that I made over 12 months ago, right? Nevertheless, I think to me, it's their last-ditch effort for relevance and survival. I'm not sure what your views are on that.
Yeah, I mean, we could do an entire 3 hour episode on Israel if we wanted to. But
we can.
Everyone's doing it. It's boring, like whatever.
Yeah.
And you're correct. It is about survival, and they are now very desperate. It's almost like this energy that I was talking about forces you to open your mouth or to reveal yourself. You can't shut up. So that's what you're saying. Everyone's coming out. I'm proud Zionist, and I will add that the events you just mentioned have shown to the world the true nature of Israel and those who support our actions. Actions do have consequences. And in this particular case, the result is what? That Jewish people are today more despised than at any other time in history, okay? And they weren't everyone's favorite to begin with. So, that's pretty, to get to those levels.
And you've done a lot of deep research into Israelites and going back even pre-Phoenicia.
Yeah. I don't think we've seen the last of this as well, because, the Jewish people, or that role that they're playing, have a major role in this theatre that is unfolding before us. And it is all happening for a particular reason at this time, and they're playing a role, and yeah, it's all being revealed. Okay, their true form.
With this unveiling, can I also mention that we're now seeing what is probably referred to as modern day American imperialism? I can only mention Greenland,
Oh,
Venezuela, Argentina, Colombia, Cuba, Somalia, and even Canada. So the expansion of the US's military presence, and as a result, and this is again a personal opinion, the daylight theft of some of those countries' resources, while at the same
yeah,
time, they're alienating their allies.
yeah, perfect. This is another great unveiling. America unmasked, showing her true face. I mean, America's done this for decades, for the last part of 100 years, but it wasn't as blatant as like, again, this is happening now for a reason. They have to show you their hand.
Mm,
And America were a bit better at doing it. They'll sort of do it behind the scenes,
yeah.
geopolitically. But now it's sort of like, well, no, we want your country, we're going to come and take it. What are you going to do about it? It's
Mm,
so, you could also throw Russia and Ukraine in there, because America was definitely involved in starting that conflict, going back to, the Obama administration.
mm,
Okay. And I'm not saying this to have a go at American people. Okay. But, America's aggressive actions, especially towards its allies, is a sign of desperation, not strength. Okay.
yeah,
Because people, if you got strength and power, and you don't need to do that, you
of
don't go
course.
and,
Yeah.
you know, and I have always maintained the belief that the American establishment is not a friend of Europe.
Yes.
All right. And it has only gained its powerful position in the world significantly since the end of World War II by keeping Europe and Europe's interests subdued.
Good point.
Like, again, I'm not having to go at American
Of course,
people,
and that's not
okay?
what we're here to do. No, of course.
Because you have no control over the oligarchs that control your nation, okay?
Yes.
Like any other people, it's the same everywhere. Now, America's recent actions have only exposed its long-term ambitions, which is to keep both its enemies and its allies subdued and fighting amongst themselves, right?
Mm,
This is an old tactic which it adopted from the British Empire. And I've mentioned this before, that America really is a continuation of that entity anyway. Britain traditionally would always pit one European nation against another while, retaining its dominance over the continent.
yeah.
It's just an old tactic.
Yeah.
So,
Clear as day.
yeah. Now, I know there are many good Americans who don't support, its especially its recent geopolitical actions, but unfortunately, there still are plenty that do. And again, showing, going through this unveiling that we're going through, a lot of these people showed their true feelings towards, Europeans on social media, especially with the events in Venezuela and
Mm,
Greenland. Oh, what are you going to do about it? Euro cucks, Euro pools, and all this
yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
to me, it has always baffled me that how people who migrated to America and the New World, either in the past or even in more recent years, can despise the countries of their ancestors. I've never understood that. I find it very sad, and I can't understand it. I mean, you're connected to those lands, those people, and a lot of them just despise them. They despise the people, their customs, their culture, and it's who you belong to. Another way to look at it is you're on the planet for a short period of time,
Mm,
not even 100 years, right? And your ancestors go and customs go back thousands. So you, in that short period, have detached from that long, long line of thousands of years and now despise them in such a short period. We've got to look at the world, you've got to look at our presence in the world much longer period than this short-lived period that we're in.
what you've got to say there is, who's put them in this position. Like you said, we're not saying that, Americans, as in the citizens, are bad. I love Americans. I've got a lot of people that I know there, but they fail to do even a little bit of research. So essentially, they believe what they're told.
Well, everyone does, to be fair. And like you said, yeah, everyone is affected by the manipulation and the propaganda. And I
Mm,
get it.
mm,
I
mm,
get
mm,
it. But
mm.
to go against your own race and that, to me, that just steps over a barrier that I don't understand and I
Yeah.
can never get.
Well,
anyway.
look, I think that's very well said. I want to pivot ever so slightly on the economic factor here, and I think what we're witnessing now kind of feels connected. It's not random or isolated, is what I'm
No,
trying to say.
it is
And
connected.
I see it, and I'll use your words in terms of unveiling. It's like
Yep.
an economic unveiling of sorts,
Yep.
which is kind of running parallel to the social and political ones we're seeing at the moment. And as you've said, and as per our earlier podcasts, the Age of Aquarius, which we spoke about that, the old systems are losing coherence and new forced ones are failing to fully emerge. And we just need to look at the markets at the moment. Crypto, for example, it initially surged as an alternative rather to the current system, and now we're seeing a complete collapse. Now, I'm sure people have got their theories as to why it's bottoming out, why Bitcoin is falling off a cliff. Even stocks, the
Stocks.
stock
Yep.
market is swinging ever so
Mm,
wildly, going up, going
mm,
down. It's like a roller
mm, mm.
coaster, and it's detached from productivity or wages, and it's propped up by liquidity rather than value, if you want to put it that way. And so to me, it looks less like volatility and more like exhaustion. And the structure as we know it appears to be sort of like on shaky ground. Okay.
Yep.
And then you've got the US dollar, and a lot of economies around the world go by the US dollar. So for decades, the petrodollar anchored American power. Oil was priced in dollars, and global demand was guaranteed. Now that system is being challenged, and it's being challenged quite openly. And further to that, why are central banks quietly increasing their gold reserves? That's a big question that I have.
Yeah, yeah. We're seeing gold and silver rise into historic highs because the US dollar, the world reserve currency, is losing its value.
Mm.
Basically, that's when gold and silver go up, when the dollar is worthless. So we're about to get into some major shit financially, I think.
Yeah.
These are all signs to me that the current global economic system is under enormous stress and probably due for some sort of reset. Okay. So I don't know what that is going to look like. It's perhaps going back to gold and silver, a gold and silver backed system, or an adoption of something new, maybe, or like digital, or maybe it's more likely a combination of the two.
Mm.
The hard as metals with the digital. Because we've discussed before that people don't even use cash anymore. They're using credit cards and they're moving away from that too. And they're going to just use phones, and so it is a digital system. But at the moment, the system's is not backed by anything. The
Yeah.
US dollar is losing its value, so they'll probably introduce some hard assets there, like gold and silver, to back it up and give
Right.
confidence to it.
Okay, that makes sense. And I want to briefly, ever so briefly, touch on the Commonwealth countries because there's a clear pattern that's happening here. And I'm talking Australia, Canada, New Zealand. They all appear to be heavily exposed to, property bubbles, consumer debt, immigration-driven growth models. Cost of living is accelerating. Governments are now doubling down on immigration and not doubling down as part of a cultural policy, but more as an economic patch, I think. And in simple terms, when people can't afford homes, when they can't afford to raise families, or even basic saving, you got to realize that something fundamental is wrong, right? Something's breaking. And I'm seeing more of this coming on social media from younger generations, from millennials, Gen Zs. And I think what we're witnessing is a managed decline, as you've just said, rather than an accidental one. So it's not
Yep.
not necessarily. I'm not hypothesizing that it's necessarily coordinated in secret rooms, although that could be another topic for another podcast. But it's more so an aligned one through incentives. And you know as well as I do that debt-based systems require growth, and growth is clearly failing. So what inevitably happens? Control replaces consent. Surveillance replaces prosperity. And dependency, and when I say dependency, I'm talking about dependency on these overspending, reckless puppet governments. It replaces ownership. And as everyone knows, they've heard it, Commandant Schwab famously quoted at the WEF, you'll own nothing and be happy. It's kind of patterns, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these patterns and these signs are not by accident, and they're indications of where we're heading. Okay. So those things that you mentioned, control replaces consent, for instance, that's where we're heading. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But
Good.
yeah, I think you're right. The decline is managed, but again, only to an extent because the people in the know are working with an energy which they have no control over, okay? They
Yeah.
can't stop its arrival or even alter its effect. So in some way, they are just going with the flow. They're going with the flow of this energy, as they say, you know?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, so it makes perfect sense
Yeah.
what you're talking about. I can also say the other thing that interests me the most is timing, and I know that you're big on patterns, you're big on timing, etc., because you've done a lot of historical research. But pandemics, wars, energy shocks, financial tightening, it's all converging while trust has literally, fallen through the floor. So, do you think this is what the Age of Aquarius is all about, for
Yep.
example? Yeah. Okay. So when these type of systems unravel, I can look at it from an economic standpoint. I can say that those anyone that's holding assets survive. Those holding wages get obliterated, right? And we'll talk about middle class and all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff shortly. But you go back through history, and it's repeatedly shown this.
Well,
But
it's that the value of these things are going to change rather than
right.
the value we are going to place on these things.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt. I'll give.
So, not interruption. I actually I would like your
Mm,
views on this,
mm.
but I'm hoping, as you have said, in terms of global consciousness, the age of Aquarius, etc., that this new age brings a complete reversal of that pattern. I know that you're more optimistic, I guess, in some ways than I am, but I guess you're more educated and learned in this area. But again, I'll quieten down. I'm not going to continue because I don't want what we're talking about to be seen as promoting fear. And I'm not predicting the end of the world. That's not going to happen.
Change
Or,
is always associated with fear, though. Always.
of course, and what I'm doing, and is what I do in my writings when I write essays and articles and short pieces, is that I'm simply questioning whether
Mm.
the economic order most people built their lives around is quietly being dismantled. That's my question.
Yep.
And
It
if
is.
it is, why is it? And
The Freemasons call it the Great Work, by the way.
right, okay. Can you tell us more about that, or is that
No, it's
probably
just I heard it from someone who was
okay?
connected with the
Okay.
Freemasons a long time ago. This was 20 years ago.
Right. Okay. But
So
but
they've planned this stuff because, like I've written about and I've said, they follow the celestial cycles. We don't.
yes,
They
yes,
do.
and we have spoken about that at length as well.
Yeah.
But if it is, and I'll close on this, that
Yeah.
the real risk for me isn't market crashes and all of that sort of stuff, right? It's essentially the hollowing out of the middle class. And once that goes, I think stability literally disappears. It goes with it.
There's other ways to look at it. Perhaps, in a way, they are asking us, how much do you really value all these things that you hold dear? Your material things. Your financial wealth. Your big mansions. Your cars, etc., etc.
Hmm.
Because I tell you, in the age of Aquarius, we will not value those things in the same way. Okay, so I'm not saying that you're gonna lose everything, or let's put it this way, you might not want that stuff. It gets to a point, and I
Yeah.
know this happened to you personally,
Mm.
and it's a very interesting thing if you want to talk about it or not. That you get to a point in your evolution where you don't want those things.
Yeah.
You happily give them up. This is what I think is going to happen on a massive, massive level around the world, especially in the West, because we've been the ones that have attained most of that stuff.
Yeah.
We've,
I
you know,
I agree with you 100%. And if I can add a personal touch to this, I did that 5 years ago. I got rid of
yeah,
everything
on your own.
from job to house to cars. I could do, it reminds me of that scene in The Matrix where I'm not sure who asks this guy, but he says, why do you, or maybe it's an Agent Smith that asks, why do you love being in the Matrix, and he's eating a steak, and he holds up
Yeah.
the steak, and he goes, "Because this tastes great." Now I'm paraphrasing.
And he
I
knows,
don't.
he says, I know it's fake,
Yes,
but
that's right. That's right. That's exactly
it,
right.
it tastes great. Yeah.
So I came to that realization 5 or 6 years ago, where I literally got rid of everything material wise.
Yeah. That's what I think this energy is going to do to people.
Well, look, you mentioned gold and silver before, and I have a question for you, and again, I'd like your views on it. To return fully to gold and silver, that sort of requires some discipline, right? And governments have continuously shown us in the past that they've avoided any sort of discipline. So, what feels more likely, in my opinion, is, and it's not my opinion because you've just mentioned it earlier, is some type of hybrid outcome. So where physical assets retain rather their value, while the digital system expands for efficiency and control. That's my evaluation. So indicators matter, but the real question isn't what replaces the system. It's who designs it, and who designs the transition, and who ends up paying for it. And also, I want to mention the mass immigration operation, which we've obviously discussed at length, but it's
Yeah.
also a major part of this collapse, which seems its only purpose is to speed up the demise of the West. Okay?
Yeah. Another thing about that,
Sure.
right, which is linked. Why are most of these people moving to Western nations? The,
Yes.
yeah. Why? Economic reasons. It's for what? Material wealth. All right.
Right.
Now we're entering an age where that is not going to have as much value placed on it. So what are these people? So you're telling me these people are prepared to give away their homelands, their families, their culture, their traditions to go to a foreign place, completely foreign, purely
For
for
mater-
financial gain.
yeah, for material gain. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen anymore.
No,
So,
I
what are these
agree.
people going to feel? Are they going to feel lost and feel, I need to go back? That's going to happen on its own.
Oh, look, I completely agree with you. And as I said earlier, what this is doing, this immigration scenario, is that it leads those. Again, I'm trying to be apolitical, but those lefty woke governments desperately trying to buy votes of unskilled and uneducated foreigners. And again, as we've said before, in a last ditch attempt to perhaps hold on to power. So, personally, like you've made it crystal clear, I too think that the Age of Aquarius is going to take care of that debacle very, very quickly.
Mm.
And when people believe the system is no longer neutral, where national cohesion erodes, where I guess shared identity fragments and economic competition becomes cultural resentment, that's pretty dangerous terrain, in my opinion. And not because diversity exists. From my perspective, it's because fairness doesn't exist. Now, I don't see this as accidental, as I've said. I see it as a, fragmentation, replacing unity, where you see smaller groups are easier to manage than a confident middle class with shared interests.
And they keep pushing that line, you'll own nothing and you'll be
Yep.
happy, right? And people interpret that as communism, or
Yes.
they're after my stuff. They're going to take my stuff. No, what these people know what's coming. So what they're trying to tell you is that you're going to willingly say that I own nothing, because you don't own anything. You don't own anything. You're purely using it. That's the reality. And maybe we're entering an age where people are going to understand that. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And like you, I have noticed there is a clear breakdown of everything that makes, a civilization or society, or makes you want to be part of a society. Because societies can only function as long as we have trust and belief in it, you know. Once the people no longer trust or believe in the system or the systems, it collapses. And that's one of the theories around ancient Rome and why it collapses, because people no longer believed in Rome. You know,
Yeah.
so it's one theory that historians cling to. So yeah, we're seeing people, I guess, losing faith in the systems like law enforcement, the justice, so-called justice system. They're losing faith in government, as you said, over and over. Its leaders. I mean, does anyone like any leaders? I mean, historically, you can go look back and people liked Churchill was loved during his time, not afterwards, because people cotton on to what he was actually doing. But, there were leaders where people admired that. That's rarely the case anymore. That's not by accident. People are losing faith, like you said, in the economy. You mentioned housing, money. Can people even trust making investments? Like, where do they put their money? If people aren't spending and investing, that causes chaos.
Of course.
Is keeping your money in the bank safe? Do people trust banks anymore?
Yeah.
Can people confident in getting jobs? I don't know. How about retirement? Are you confident you're going to have anything? These are all the questions people are asking in the last 10 years or less even. A big one is, trust in the medical industry is at an all-time low. I mean, I've heard people that, were happy to go and take vaccines and medicines and visit the doctors who are not doing that anymore, who are questioning that stuff, and this is going to be, again, I think, revealed in the next few years even more, especially around medicines and vaccines.
So something is clearly happening.
Yeah, exactly. You can see it. You can see it. And as you said, as a result of mass immigration, people are also now, and this is, I think, another result of this mass immigration, is that people are questioning their national identity. So, what does that even mean today in a lot of countries? And, for me, it didn't mean much in Australia 20 years ago, let alone today. But those countries have, I believe, from the outset, been set up as economic zones, okay?
Yeah.
They're not nations in the traditional sense. And, what does it mean when everyone is of a different racial type or, has a different mindset, speaks in a foreign tongue, has different beliefs and moral judgments? There's no unity there. And at that point, you are no longer part of a nation. You're living together in a zone purely for, economic reasons.
An economic melting pot, I would call it.
This has never happened before on such a large scale in human history. You've had economic zones like city-states where you can sort of confine it to a small space and population. People know they're there for that. They're there for business, a bit like Dubai. People know they're there for business and then they go out. But never on a national major, nation of 100 million people, for instance. It never happened like that before. And I always say that this is most evident in the English speaking world because they are the champions of the current global system. It comes from them. Therefore, only their collapse will signal change. Nothing's going to change if it happens in another country like Colombia or Singapore or Hong Kong. No one cares. But, if it happened in Britain or America, that will force change everywhere. And I just mentioned before, people call me a racist or a fascist or whatever, which, I kind of take as a compliment anyway. We're over these.
We spent a whole.
Who cares?
Well, we spent a whole podcast on what fascism really is, as opposed to what.
I'll get to that later too. And no matter what woke academia tells you today, the hard cold truth is that white people, mostly of only a handful of nationalities from Europe, made those nations that the English-speaking countries what they are and what they were with the amount of power and wealth that they accumulated. Was because of their actions. And, the current decline in those countries is a direct result of its new forced multiculturalism. But, I also believe, like I said, this is part of a larger event and it's all been manufactured on purpose.
Yeah, look, I guess overarching, trust is what I believe to be the foundation of any functioning society. And once that erodes across institutions like government, law enforcement, the economy, healthcare, as you've mentioned, you essentially see the system begin to fracture. And what's striking to me now is how visible that loss of faith has become. Right? Public questioning, social media debates, growing protests.
Right? I mean, you just go back to the boomer generation. They just gobbled up everything the people, the government and the TV told them. See how much it's changed.
Yeah.
And you and like you mentioned, you just look at the younger generation. they've got no trust in the systems,
Yeah.
absolutely zero. That's all done on purpose. It's part of this energy, okay?
Yes, yes, yes. And I guess the scale of social change, let's call it, migration,
Yep,
and as you've just mentioned earlier about cultural mixing, it kind of adds another layer of complexity, right? So it
yep,
challenges people's sense of national identity and cohesion. So
yep.
whether or not somebody agrees with the causes, the outcome is clear, is that societies, and again, a personal opinion, societies that are built on shared belief and trust can't function when those pillars are weakened. And we're watching that process unfold, in my opinion, in real time. And I
Yeah,
think
and it's not an opinion because there's clearly evidence to prove it.
precisely with what we've discussed in the last 30 minutes or so. And I think you'll agree here that most, and I like this term because you use it quite often, most normies are only now starting to notice the early signs of this social breakdown,
Yeah, because
which
it's
is
affecting them now
because it's
personally.
affecting
You
them,
see?
right? So, but those of us that have been paying attention have been
Mm,
feeling it for years. We've been
yep,
feeling it that it's been building for years. But what's different now is visibility. Okay, we knew, now it's in the public domain, and so those pressures have clearly spilled into the mainstream. So more people are questioning things publicly, posting things on social media without filter, right? Debating what was once unquestionable. Protests. Look at protests around the world. They're growing,
yep, yep,
not just in numbers, but in frequency. And what
yep.
really I guess annoys me is that governments are responding by doubling down. They're tightening restrictions. They're regulating assemblies. They're framing dissent as threat. We've seen the law that's just been passed in New South Wales in Australia following the Bondi shooting, that they're going to extend this law of you're not allowed to protest against A, B, and C. So they're being quite specific. Come on, give me a break,
Look, it
please.
started as a prison colony. Yeah, it hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed, and you are spot on with that. And I always refer to it as the prison colony. But the more I see people pushing back, the more control is asserted, and that tension for me only makes the unrest more visible, more urgent, harder to contain. I don't know. It's kind of a repetitive, never-ending circular motion, the way I see it. If I was to put it into visual terms.
Yeah, it is. It is all part of this thing that we're going through. And yes, as you know, we normally do with our chats, I want to focus not on the end results or the physical results of what we're
Mm.
witnessing, but rather the effect. I'm a big believer on this. The effect it has on us, the people. Your mind, your emotions. Okay, and we've already
Yeah.
touched on a lot of those so far, but because there is, once again, this is part of an alchemical process which is affecting humanity. Okay,
Right.
now, humanity, when I talk about, the world at large, we're at different stages. We're at different stages of development and social civilization. So it's not going to affect everyone the same because for instance, when we're saying about material things, maybe some people don't have to learn that lesson. It's another lessons they have to learn.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
But us in the West definitely need to learn that lesson. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's going to affect everyone, but not everyone in the same way. Yeah, and I am, one of these people, like I think you mentioned that I saw this coming years ago.
You did.
And,
Yeah.
yeah. And just from a personal perspective, I made the decision to leave the country on my birth, Australia in 2016. That's when I made the decision. I was seeing it a lot earlier than that, but because I could see even, back then where it was heading. And all my friends and family said that I was crazy and delusional. Oh my
Yeah.
God. But everything in Australia in particular has unfolded as I foreseen, and people don't understand what I had to give up. I had to give up material wealth like you wouldn't believe. I mean, I was on a very easy, large income. I had to drop that down to less than a third.
Gee.
So that's a big life
Yeah.
changing thing.
Same. Yeah.
Big home to a little small little shoebox apartment.
Sure.
I made the sacrifices, So did my family. So yeah, but even though, like you mentioned, we're all seeing these changes, and even a lot of normies are starting to see them, there are still many people who refuse to face the reality, and maintain that, I've got people that I speak to and they maintain everything's fine, and that, it can or it can all be reverted back to what it was previously. I mean, some Australians think they're going to get rid of 70% of the population, and
Go
that's just
back
not
to
going
what
to
it.
happen.
Yeah, that's right.
And like, where do they stop? Like, say, all right, we only want white people. Okay, so then, all right, you get rid of, the recent immigration people, which is, if you want to put in
But
Indians or
predominantly from India.
Chinese or
Oh, it's
Muslim,
predominantly
do you
Indian. Yeah,
stop
yeah.
at? Then do you stop at, Slavic people? Do you stop? What happens to the Italians and the Greeks? When is it their turn to go back, and you just keep
Sure.
it Anglo-Saxon? Where are you going to stop?
Mm,
They don't have a racial where, if you say, China, for instance, yeah, you're Chinese, we know you're Chinese, and that's it, like, it stops
mm,
there.
mm.
If you're not, you leave. Australia doesn't have that. America doesn't have that. England does. England can do it. But I just don't believe that will happen, especially in those places. But, the system is changing, and we need to accept that. And some things will be retained, but many, many places and cultures and beliefs, institutions will not make it through. They'll have to adopt new things. Some things will be retained, though. And I think the things that will be retained are things that have been with us for a long time: our traditions, our culture, religion, but don't believe religion in the form that it is now.
Mm.
Because with a new age, there's always a new religion. And, I've said this many times, that Christianity is just, a rebranded, the core essence of Christianity is ancient, but Christianity as you know it is very recent, and it's just a rebranding of something older. And I think something like that will happen again.
Again, very well said. And can I just say that we've known each other for quite a while, and I can vouch for the fact that you were talking about all of this to me close to 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
opinion, you were definitely ahead of the curve, and I think that's an important point because a lot of people, again, as you've just said, they don't want to face reality while all this is unfolding.
No.
And this is, again, I don't want to focus on Australia, but only because it's our birthplace. And this, I feel, is endemic within Australian culture, and it's more comfortable for them to believe everything will snap back to how it was, right? So they remain in this echo
Yeah.
chamber that reinforces that idea. So even on social media, if I make a comment or others make a comment that's antagonistic to the current, I guess, setting in that country, I always read things and hear things like, Australia will always be the lucky country, or, oh, it's not really that
Yeah.
bad here, or Australia's such a beautiful country and we're going to be looked after, or worse
What happens when
still.
their wealth goes?
Well,
What have
this
they
is the thing,
got?
and this is the thing, they don't. But even worse, they say Australia is such a beautiful country, and if you don't like it, go back to where you came from, which I find quite disturbing. When it gets to that point, and it scares me to some degree, and not for me and my family because we've made the decision and we've moved on. It's more so for the next generation of Aussies. Nevertheless, the algorithms, the media, even social circles reward reassurance over confrontation. For me, when that reality keeps contradicting the narrative, that psychological dissonance is what I call it, takes its toll. So accepting that systems change and that some things won't survive the transition is, as you've said, uncomfortable. I get it. But
Yep.
avoiding that truth only delays that emotional train
Yeah.
wreck.
Look, they'll have to confront it. We all are going to have to confront these things, because this energy is going to force you to. And yeah, people are simply scared, and change brings uncertainty and fear. And, I went through it. You went through it. Like I said, I mean, anyone today, you try, reducing your wage by, less than a third, and see
Yeah,
and see overnight, and see how well you do. It's not easy,
that's right.
and I did whatever it took. I did jobs that, I wouldn't normally do, but,
Of course.
whatever you
You
do, what
do
you
what
got
you
to
do
do.
to survive. That's right.
Yeah. People in fear, like I said, they're also very dangerous,
Mm,
dangerous to themselves and others, especially when their illusions of everything that they thought was true is unveiled and exposed. And that's what's happening across the world, across
right.
all the facets that I'm not going to repeat, that we've
Of
gone
course.
through.
Mm.
And we saw this, again with people's behavior during COVID. And that is something that, I experienced personally. But, I believe that COVID marked only the beginning of something bigger. And I felt that at the time, which is now just now growing in intensity and is going to do so in the next few years as well, even more. And the truth is coming if you like it or not. So you just got to prepare yourself mentally for it.
Again, like you, I think I've made my position clear. Even though I guess we left, or I left my home country for different reasons to you, but when I reflect on that period, it probably feels less like choice and more like spiritual guidance. And again, we've touched on the
That's
Age
what
of
this
Aquarius.
energy is, though.
Yeah,
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 you're
no,
in tune with it without knowing, and it was
yeah,
pushing you there.
yeah, and particularly in the last 3 years, I believe that I have become more in tune to that. So
Mm.
for me, it was as if the universe nudged me before I
Mm.
fully
Yep.
understood why. I couldn't quite understand or sense the elements of what was unfolding back home. Obviously, not as clearly or decisively as you did, but I still believed naively, and this is where I have grown, that things would eventually correct themselves. Right?
Nah,
That's again, okay.
we're not going back to the
I
old
un-
systems.
completely understand, appreciate, and I agree with you. But being in Europe, while let's call it robust immigration into Australia has taken place, has kind of given me distance and perspective, right? And in that
Mm.
sense, it does feel like I dodged a bullet of sorts, and that's for me now impossible to ignore. But I do want to say that everybody is on their own journey. Everyone's on their
Yeah.
own path. So some will realize now, some will realize later. But I don't think it's ever too late.
Yeah, and people have different lessons to learn, like I mentioned earlier. But, even back when I made the decision to leave Australia, I also had an overwhelming feeling that this sort of period meant that I needed to take my final position,
Mm.
right? Or like where do I want to be when this all happens? Where will I ultimately want to be laid to rest?
Right.
I never saw that in Australia. So I was just like, where will you stand and fight, for instance? Are you happy to defend and die for a nation that despises you?
Oh
You know,
my God, that's
think
that.
about that. Think, are you happy to do that?
Mm, mm,
Um, and I asked myself, where did I feel most at home, most connected? And, for me, that was easy because I wanted to be in my ancestral lands. Like I said earlier, I wanted to go home because, if you've migrated to Australia or America or the New World, you've only been there for one generation or two,
yeah,
as opposed to thousands and thousands of years. Now, some people are connected to that feeling and in tune to it. Others are not, and they're
mm,
easily just whatever. I'm in the new world. This is my country. This is
yeah,
my, I'm not here to, wherever you. Because people ask me, where should I go? People have asked me that from Australia. Where do I go? Go where you feel most at home, most
of course.
connected.
Good advice. Yeah.
I can't answer that for everyone, but for me, it was easy.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is different and difficult for most people, especially in the modern world, to make a life-changing decision like we have, right?
Of course. Yeah.
But we are all going to be faced with difficult choices of what is actually important to us, and what really matters in the end. Is it your career? Your income, like I mentioned,
Mm,
and how people, especially Americans, go on about the GDP. How
yep.
important
Yep.
that is, or
Yep.
your mansions or whatever.
Yeah.
Euro pause. Yeah, I'm happy to be poor, but I'm rich in so many other ways. I
Of
wouldn't give it up
course.
for anything.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
I saw a post the other day on Twitter or X that really encapsulates what I was feeling at the time, when I made my decision. And this was from a young woman, and it said something like, my parents left their villages in Greece to give us a better life. And now all I want to do is live in a village in Greece,
Well, yeah,
right?
I think I came across the same one. That's brilliant.
But that's like the same experience. My parents came from, a poor part of Italy to give us a better life. But what is that better life? It's a
Sure.
material, it's a better material life.
Yeah.
But what were you giving up? Traditions, customs, family. We're reaching it. Like I'm saying, I keep repeating, we're going to reach an age where we're going to value things differently. Okay.
Sure.
And this energy that is affecting our subconsciousness is one that I think is only going to again get stronger. And these
Agreed.
decisions, like that feeling that that girl was feeling, is going to be more evident. And so a lot of people are going
Mm,
to want to start looking, maybe even going back to the land of the ancestors. And like I said, this immigration thing,
mm.
people I think are going to willingly go back. A lot of them. You will have to make, a choice about what is ultimately important, and ask yourself this: if you strip away all the wealth and material objects and pursuits from your life, and from the place you live in, which I think we mentioned already, what will be left? What would that place offer you? This is what I say about Dubai. People go, I'm going to go move to Dubai. Yeah, because you're going there for financial reasons. But if you strip all that away, does that place offer you anything for your soul, for
Yeah,
your, and that's how I see the West in a lot of places.
absolutely. And I think, further to what you've just said, life-changing decisions are never just logistical. They're not just about
No.
moving from one place to another. I think they hit at every level of our being, emotional, mental, spiritual. The choice might feel clear in our minds, but the journey will definitely test you and test you constantly. And again, I
Mm.
say this, you and I are living proof of this. I know personally that I started to question myself, my family, my priorities. And you do feel the weight of dragging others through uncertainty.
Yeah.
And it used to
Family.
gnaw at
Yeah.
me at every step of the way. So,
Mm. Mm.
but coming out from all the rubble, let's call it, I've definitely made the right decision. Again, you've summarised it just a moment ago. So here's what I've come to understand, and I might get a little deep here, and excuse me if I do. But what I've come to understand is that adversity isn't a sign of failure. I think it's a measure of the choice. It essentially forces you to confront what actually matters. And as you've mentioned earlier, beyond income, beyond status, or dare I say,
How else are you supposed to grow? How else are you supposed to grow? You
that's
know?
right. That's right. And this is where the Age of Aquarius comes into it, right? Even beyond material security, which in my opinion is a huge problem in Western countries, where everyone's trying to keep up with the Joneses. Now, from my home country,
That's
that's
another thing. They earn
yeah,
all this money. They earn all this, they got wealth and jobs, and they're always broke,
yeah. Well,
and
yeah.
they're in debt.
The classic comment is living paycheck to paycheck. Now it's
Yeah.
going further back. It's living not paycheck to paycheck, but every 2 weeks before pay comes in. Anyway, that kind of existence saddens me that people are
Yeah.
willing to stay on that treadmill. And again, this is from a personal reflection, when you eventually reach the other side, when you come out, when you walk out of that rubble, when your decision aligned with your values and your peace of mind, which to me is critically important, and I know it is to you as well, it becomes something others like family, friends, acquaintances can look and learn from. But here's the kicker: only if they're ready to face their own truth. Again, as I said, people are on separate journeys; they're on different
Yeah.
paths, and
Yes.
if they're ready to face their own truth, to step outside that system that they've been conditioned to accept. Now, my view is that the willingness to ask the hard questions is what separates survival from mere existence. And personally, and a lot of people who know me know this, I refuse to simply exist.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I felt that I was just existing rather than living. So that's an important factor. And everybody is going to be affected by this. Okay, this great
Mm,
unveiling or the facing of the truth is affecting everyone. And we mentioned it. You can see it everywhere across all the institutions around the world. These illusions also could be personal ones, like one's relationships with family and friends and marriages. And maybe that's why a lot of marriages are ending in divorce in the last 10, 20 years. It's part of this energy as well. People are turning away, questioning their faith, their careers. Why am I doing this? Anything that you have held to believe as absolute truth is going to be thrown into question, because this tearing down of illusions has all got to do, like I said, with an energy which has not, now this is important, not affected the earth and consequently humanity for quite a while. Okay, and one which is now making its presence felt, as we all can see clearly.
yeah.
And I've said before, will only continue to get more intense. I have also noticed, a recent trend amongst social influencers. All right, I observe this stuff too. It's almost like confirmation for
No,
me.
you
All
do,
right,
yeah.
and a lot of them are being exposed for holding, and I've always called them out as being paid in, paid shills anyway, but
Yeah.
they're being exposed now for holding fake and counter views to what they, I claim to be this and that, and then the truth comes out that they're complete opposite. And some of them, are related obviously to the issue around Israel. And our government shield, Nick Fuentes,
Oh,
was
okay,
also
yeah.
under the spotlight recently for, backtracking and flip-flopping on a lot of issues that, initially gained him a lot of support. So,
Yeah, yeah, of
his mask is coming undone too.
course.
But another one that I found interesting and I wanted to share was there's this whole, I don't know if you're familiar with this term, the whole online trad movement or thing, which is
No.
mostly led by female personalities that, oh, I don't want to be perceived as, Instagram or Twitter whore. I'm about dressing and acting in a very conservative manner. And they're sort of online trads. And, I always say they're just there for, most of them, for clicks and likes and economic reasons. And, many of these lately have been exposed as actually not holding traditional values at all. And one
Oh,
example was a particular woman who claimed why you would do this is beyond me. Claimed
right.
openly to be a virgin, right? I don't
Okay.
know why people do this. It's part of this persona that people think is real and it's just
Right.
fake,
It
right?
is, yeah.
And she was stressing how she was waiting for marriage and also insisted that her fiance needed to wait as well, right? So this
Okay.
is this is the character that she had built up that people, believed.
Believed in, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But then it was revealed that she was actually sleeping around with someone else while she was engaged and married. So
Oh,
engaged, sorry,
right,
this
okay.
the entire time. So telling
Mm.
everyone, influencing everyone else. You got to be a virgin. How great and traditional I am and virtuous, while actually doing. And I'm not saying that sleeping around before you're married is a sin or anything,
Mm.
but don't present yourself as a fake. Be honest. I mean, actual traditional women don't strive to be famous in the first place.
That's right.
It's an oxymoronic position to begin with,
Yep.
and to be online anyway and to vie for attention.
Yep.
I mean that kind of person is going to be a liar anyway,
That's
or
right.
simply there to just gain attention and to gain from it financially, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and I will warn people again that during this period, it is going to be much harder to maintain a lie, okay? Because this energy that's what it's about. It's about forcing the truth out, the unveiling, the revelation. That's what we're entering, revelation.
So let me ask you this question. Okay, I think we've come to the crux of it. Why now?
Yeah,
Why the removing of the veil now?
I'm glad you asked, and we have touched on it already, but because it all has to do with the effects of the motions of the celestial bodies and the effects they have on humanity during this particular period of transition into the age of Aquarius, which is going to be, we're in the major part of it, and then it does settle down eventually. Okay.
Kind of makes sense because that's what I've always, and again, my question was in some ways rhetorical, but my
Yep.
understanding of the age of Aquarius in astrological terms is, again, as you've said, transparency, collective consciousness, and the dismantling or the systemic dismantling, rather, of illusions, structures, beliefs based on fear, secrecy, all that sort of
Yep.
stuff.
And that's what we see, right?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. People are starting to talk about it, but they're referring to it as the Great Awakening. And
Yeah.
sure, absolutely, I take this on, and I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, because again, astrologically, you have probably dived a little bit deeper than I have, but it represents a move from the Piscean age of, I don't know, blind faith hierarchy to an Aquarian age of knowledge, truth, technological advancement. Now, I'm not sure whether astrologers agree or disagree on when the Aquarian age will actually begin. Some have said that it's already started. I personally think it's already started. But from
Signs show where it's already started.
It's already
Yeah.
started, right? Okay. So most of the materials that I've read on the subject say that it arrived in the 20th century,
Yep.
with the 24th century as the next most likely outcome, the candidate, right? But recent events clearly indicate we may have already entered into it, as you and I have said.
Yeah, yeah. The signs indicate that we're already in the age of Aquarius, and I believe we have been for at least the last 100 years. That's where I started seeing the signs. So remember that Aquarius is an air sign, not a water sign. A lot of people
Yeah.
get that mixed up. So we got to look for evidence in air-based signs, right? So the Aquarian age is defined, amongst other things, like you said, by technological and scientific advancements. And we've seen it, since the late 19th century, with the onset of electricity, and into the 20th century with the inventions of radio, airwaves,
Mm.
aeroplanes, television, computers, digital currency, they're all air-based
Yeah,
signs.
based,
So
right. Okay.
you know, we've moved so far in such a short period of time in terms of technology, and that is a clear sign of the age of Aquarius. Aquarius also has two ruling planets, Saturn and Uranus. The planet Uranus is strongly associated with electricity, and again, that's why why we see those inventions, and electricity playing a major role in our lives, again, starting from the 20th century.
And looking into the characteristics of Uranus, we're told that it shatters the status quo and overcomes the old concepts and
Yeah,
things that have outlived their usefulness, as you've clearly stated over the last hour or so. For me, it brings change and
yep.
upheaval.
Mm.
And as we know, many will fight to keep things as they were, as we've just outlined. And you've stressed this, and I'll stress this again, that people must be prepared for change, good or bad.
Mm.
Forward movement always brings change, right? And yet many traditions and or social customs have their roots in age-tested patterns that shouldn't be overlooked. And I suspect that that's exactly what's happening right now.
Yeah, I agree. A good place to start with all this is with defining the characteristics of the planets also, and the ages. The one we just left, Pisces, for instance, and the one we're currently entering or have just entered, which, is Aquarius.
And I guess
It,
the simplified view is that the age of Pisces, if I can just add to that, is characterized as an era of faith, spirituality, compassion, and profound emotional intensity, right? And it featured, past tense, themes of sacrifice, mysticism, and the dissolution of social barriers alongside things like, rigid religious dogma and persecution.
yeah, and the characteristics you mentioned were observed with the rise of the strict religious dogma of, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity over the past centuries. Um, these ideas are now dying
Right.
as we enter the new age. Okay, like I said earlier, I don't think they're going to disappear, but they'll change. We're shifting from faith-based hierarchical structures to knowledge-based networks.
Right.
Um, away from placing your faith in false systems, in false doctrines, in false leaders,
Mm.
false heroes, your false gods, which we are seeing. This is all breaking down to, probably one of a universal truth, truth that is evident to everyone,
Mm.
one based on first-hand experience or first-hand knowledge.
Yeah.
You've had that experience, you know it to be true,
Yeah.
not take this medicine, trust me, it works,
Yeah. Yeah.
as an example. Um, take this vaccine. Anyway, I'm also keeping an eye out for, the adoption of a new or old language,
Okay.
perhaps modified, because I believe a new order or a new age requires a new operating system. We can't run a new program on an old operating system.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so I'm looking out for something like that as well. Also, yeah, many Christians today also believe we're heading towards this, revelation, apocalypse kind of scenario. In Christianity, especially evangelical fields, it's associated with the end times. They always make it negative: the rapture, death, destruction, the judgment of the world, and they also
Mm.
associate it with the second coming of Jesus Christ.
Well, here's an etymological fun fact, and I know that you're big on words, as you have written in your book. People can listen to our very, very first podcast on your book. The word apocalyptic originates from the Greek word apokalypsis, literally meaning an unveiling, a revealing, or to uncover.
I'm glad you had to say that word, not me.
Well, like phonetically, it's not too bad, but while the modern usage, as you've said, often equates it with doomsday, it historically refers to a literary genre or experience where hidden divine truths.
Exactly, and that's more accurate, isn't it? That's what we're seeing. And like I mentioned many times before, the Christians have the correct information, but they fail to understand it correctly, and they take it literally,
Yeah.
right? So the information has been given to you, it's just you don't understand it. And the death and destruction will happen, but it's going to happen in your mind, in the subconscious level.
Yes. Yes.
Your old world, your old ideas, your old beliefs will die. You can't hold on to them. The second coming of Jesus Christ is, in actual fact, Uranus, or we call Uranus today, but
Mm.
Uranus, who is what? The sky god, known also as the God of heaven. Does that
Yeah.
sound familiar? The God of heaven to Christians?
Yeah.
Okay, he's coming back to rule earth once more with the new age. Read a book outside the Bible and you might learn something.
No, good point. And just again, as another fun fact, Uranos in ancient Greek and in modern Greek refers to sky. That's I see that quite
Yeah,
clearly, being
they
proficient in
give
the
you the
language.
clues if people just.
So you mentioned earlier that the Age of Aquarius has two ruling planets, Saturn and Uranus. In my understanding of the basics of astrology, Saturn is the one that governs structure, discipline, responsibility, and to some degree limitations. So it demands organisation, rules, and order. And let's say that it acts as I don't know, a stern teacher that rewards tenacity and punishes laziness, right? And Saturn represents the way that we structure our world. It's also best to build on a foundation of rock rather than sand. That's my analogy. So to keep in touch with our roots and to make sure that we're on track with our missions and goals. And so revisions, yes, may be necessary. And
Yep.
let's be clear about it, where we are headed.
Yeah, I mean, I may be wrong, but this, indicates to me that after the upheaval caused by Uranus and the collapse of the current systems and institutions, that a new order will arise, and it will be one based on structure, discipline, responsibility, and which punishes laziness, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And this is something that if people believe that you don't need government, I'm here to tell you you're wrong, because even though like you may be, a moral, upstanding person that wouldn't do stupid stuff, there are many, 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 many people that need a firm hand, just like a child. You
Mm.
know, you can't have children running around amok. People just do take advantage. You
Yeah.
do need a structure in place. Okay.
Mm.
Um, Obviously, one is easier to manage if there's a lot more cohesion and trust, and that's I think where they're referring to this, structure of discipline and responsibility comes into it. And punishing laziness means communism is out. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and I'm going to mention something here because I believe we're going towards a fascist system, but not fascism as you've
Yes,
been
they
taught.
know it. That's right. Yeah.
All right. Now I'll explain why. And this is how Mussolini defined the idea of fascism, even though it didn't eventuate. And I think it didn't happen for one reason: the timing wasn't right. They tried to implement it at the wrong time. Okay, the energy wasn't right. The people weren't ready for it. Now, this is how he defines what fascism is. The concept is a spiritual one,
Yes.
arising from the general reaction of the century against the materialistic philosophy of the 19th century. Play that over and over again. That's what the Age of Aquarius and those two ruling planets tell me. It's a spiritual one, but also it's going to have some form and structure to it, which fascism, definitely does. It's not this laziness and oh, just sit at home playing video games. Oh, live off the government,
Yeah.
handouts and stuff.
Yeah.
No, that's going. It's about responsibility and discipline. If you want to know more about it, go back to our podcast, Why Fascism, and I'll explain in there what it means.
Yeah, and I was about to refer to that,
Okay.
refer listeners to that episode. I can't quite recall the number of the episode, but yeah, we did spend the entire episode on fascism and the true meaning behind it, not the misconceived narrative and ideas that we've been sold to about it. Look, I'd be interested to hear from those listening to this episode, or those that have lasted till the
This
end.
long.
Well, it's been. Look, I've found it quite an interesting discussion, and I'd be interested in hearing what other people think of all this. And as always, we encourage discourse and comments on whatever platform people are listening to this on. But again, we've reached the end of our session. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to mention briefly that the name of another researcher, Bill Donahue,
Okay.
who discusses this subject in great detail. And, I got a lot of information from him. And for those who want to learn more, and I'll leave a link, to his channel in the description below. So
Fantastic.
people can follow that.
Thanks for sharing that. Well, that's us for today. Just two guys thinking out loud, connecting the dots, and obviously sharing perspectives. For those still here, thanks for spending the time with us. This has been Meeting of the Minds, and we'll be back next week to continue the conversation. Until then, always stay curious. This is Phoenician Hunter and 369 Lumineer signing off.